There's something that haunts me about empire collapse. It's not that empires fall, that's inevitable. It's that they always see it coming. Rome had economists warning about currency debasement 200 years before the collapse. Spain had financial advisors screaming about silver-driven inflation while the monarchy ignored them. Britain had treasury officials writing memos about losing reserve currency status 30 years before it happened. 3 empires, 3 sets of warnings, 3 complete data sets showing exactly what was about to destroy them. And none of them stopped it. Not because they didn't know, because knowing the pattern and stopping the pattern require 2 different things. One requires data, the other requires sacrifice. And no empire in history has ever chosen sacrifice. So here's the question that should terrify you. America has the same warnings right now, the exact same data, the exact same pattern unfolding. Why would we be different? Here's what those 3 empires knew. They knew their currency was being debased. They had the numbers. They knew inflation would follow. They had the math. They knew confidence would collapse. They had historical precedent from every empire before them. And they knew that stopping it would require cutting spending, raising taxes, or defaulting on promises. Political suicide. So they chose inflation. They chose debasement. They chose collapse, because collapse is a future problem. Re-election is a current problem. In this video, I'm going to show you 3 things. First, the specific warnings Rome, Spain, and Britain received, and the exact parallels America is seeing today. Second, the 7-stage pattern every empire follows, and why we're currently in stage 5 heading into stage 6. Third, what happens next. Not speculation, but historical precedent based on 2,000 years of documented pattern repetition. Before we dive deeper, let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what economic trend worries you most right now? And if you want to see where this pattern is heading, hit subscribe. Because the mathematics don't care about optimism, they only care about patterns. And the pattern is absolute. Let's establish the framework. 4 empires, 2,000 years, 1 pattern. 1. Rome, 27 BC to 476 AD. Dominant for 5 centuries, collapsed economically before it collapsed militarily. Spain, 1492 to 1898, controlled half the world's silver, went bankrupt 4 times in 40 years. Britain, 1815 to 1945. The pound sterling was the world's reserve currency. Lost that status within 30 years of the warnings. America, 1945 to present. The dollar is the global reserve currency, and every single warning sign that preceded the other 3 collapses is flashing red right now. Here's what makes this different from every other America is collapsing video you've seen. We're not talking about politics, we're not talking about culture, we're not talking about military defeats, we're talking about economics, pure mathematics, currency debasement, inflation, debt saturation, and loss of confidence. The same sequence, the same stages, the same outcomes. Rome had scholars like Cassius Dio documenting the debasement in real time. Spain had economists like Martín de Apilcueta warning about inflation in 1556, a century before the collapse. Britain had treasury memos explicitly stating the pound would lose reserve status if they didn't change course. They had the data, they had the warnings, they had the pattern from every empire before them, and they did nothing. Because doing something required political choices no empire has ever been willing to make. America is no different. We have the data, we have the warnings, we have their examples, and we're following the exact same path. Let me show you how. Let's start with Rome, because Rome is the template for everything that comes after. Rome's warning. In the year 64 AD, under Emperor Nero, the Roman denarius was nearly pure silver. It weighed 3.9 grams and contained 3.8 grams of pure silver. That's 98% purity. Merchants from Britain to Egypt accepted it without question. Soldiers were paid in denarii. Taxes were collected in denarii. It was trusted. But Rome had a problem. endless wars in Germania and Parthia, infrastructure projects across 3 continents, free grain distributions to 200,000 citizens in Rome itself. The math didn't work. Tax revenue, 800 million sesterces annually. Military costs alone, 450 million sesterces. Add administration, public works and welfare, 900 million total spending. That's a 100 million sestertius deficit every single year. And raising taxes wasn't an option. The provinces were already stretched. Push harder and you trigger revolt. So Nero did what empires always do when they run out of money. He debased the currency. In 64 AD, he ordered the mints to reduce silver content from 98% to 93%, shave 5% from every coin. That's 50 million sesterces of pure profit, instant revenue, no new taxes, problem solved. Except it wasn't solved. By 200 AD, the denarius was 50% silver. By 265 AD, it was 5% silver. That's a 95% debasement over 200 years. And here's what happened to prices. What cost 1 denarius in 200 AD cost 50 denarii by 300 AD, a 50 times increase in 1 century. Soldiers refused payment in denarii. They demanded gold. Merchants hoarded goods rather than accept worthless coins. The economy collapsed into barter. The scholar Cassius Dio, writing in the early 200s AD, explicitly warned about this. He documented the spiraling military costs, the currency debasement, the unsustainable expansion. Rome had the data. They knew what was happening. They knew where it led. Emperor Aurelian attempted reforms in 270 AD, openly admitting the currency was ruined. Too late. The economic collapse was already irreversible. The military collapse followed. By 476 AD, Rome was done. Think about what that means. They had 200 years of warnings, 200 years of watching the pattern unfold, 200 years to change course. They didn't. America's parallel. Now let's look at the United States dollar. In 1913, the dollar was backed by gold. You could exchange paper dollars for a fixed amount of gold at any bank. In 1971, President Nixon ended dollar-gold convertibility. The dollar became pure fiat currency, backed by nothing except government promise. Since 1913, the dollar has lost 97% of its purchasing power. That's not inflation. That's currency debasement. From 2008 to 2022, the Federal Reserve's balance sheet expanded from $800 billion to over $9 trillion. That's an 11-fold increase in the monetary base in 14 years. From 2020 to 2021 alone, the United States printed over $6 trillion. More than 40% of all dollars in existence were created in 2 years. Let me show you the exact parallel. Rome's denarius started at 98% pure silver, ended at 5% pure silver. That's 95% debasement. America's dollar started backed by gold, now backed by nothing. That's 100% debasement of backing. Rome's timeline, 200 years from peak to collapse. America's timeline, 52 years from gold standard exit to present. Rome debased to fund wars, infrastructure and welfare. America prints to fund wars, infrastructure and welfare. Rome's debasement accelerated in the final century. America's money printing has accelerated dramatically since 2008. The mechanism is identical. Create more currency to fund spending you can't afford through taxation. Prices rise, purchasing power collapses, trust erodes. Rome took 200 years. America is speed-running the same pattern in half the time. The parallels aren't similar. They're exact. Here's how currency collapse actually operates. It's not random, it's not complicated, it's mathematical. Every empire that has collapsed economically followed the same 7-stage sequence. Let me show you the framework. Stage 1, dominance. The empire is at its peak. Unmatched military power, economic supremacy, currency trust is absolute. Rome with the denarius, Spain with access to infinite silver, Britain with the pound sterling, America with the dollar. At this stage, the currency is accepted globally without question. Stage 2, overextension. The empire expands beyond its economic capacity to maintain control. Rome across 3 continents with 35 provinces. Spain trying to control trade routes across every ocean. Britain colonizing a quarter of the Earth's land surface. America maintaining 750 military bases across 80 countries. Military and administrative costs begin to exceed productive economic capacity. Stage 3. Deficit spending. The empire spends more than it earns. Consistently, structurally. They borrow, they issue bonds, they promise to pay it back later. The deficits become permanent features, not temporary measures. Rome borrowed from wealthy senators and foreign kings. Spain borrowed from Genoese bankers. Britain issued war bonds and borrowed from its colonies. America issues treasury bonds and borrows from foreign central banks. Stage 4. Currency debasement. This is the critical stage. This is where the trap closes. They can't borrow enough. They can't tax enough. But they can't cut spending without triggering political collapse. So they debase the currency. Rome reduced silver content in coins. Spain flooded Europe with American silver, destroying its value. Britain left the gold standard in 1931. America left the gold standard in 1971 and has printed trillions since. This is the point of no return. Once you start debasing to fund spending, you cannot stop without making politically impossible choices. Stage 5. Inflation. More currency units chasing the same amount of goods. Prices rise. Rome saw bread prices increase 50 times in 1 century. Spain experienced the price revolution. Prices rose 6 times over 150 years across all of Europe. Britain saw 25% inflation in the 1970s, destroying middle-class savings. America hit 9% inflation in 2022, with persistent elevated prices continuing. This is where the middle class gets destroyed. Fixed income groups lose purchasing power. Wealth transfers from savers to debtors. Social instability accelerates. Stage 6. Loss of confidence. Domestic and foreign actors lose trust in the currency. Roman soldiers refused denarii and demanded gold. Spanish trading partners rejected debased silver coins. Global holders of pounds demanded guarantees against devaluation. And when Britain couldn't provide them, they abandoned sterling. America. BRICS. Nations are creating dollar alternatives. Central banks are reducing dollar reserves. Oil is being sold in yuan. Gold purchases are accelerating. This is the cascade. Once confidence breaks, it breaks fast. Stage 7. Collapse. The currency loses value catastrophically or loses its dominant position. The empire can no longer fund its military, can no longer maintain its commitments, can no longer control its territory. Rome. By 400 AD, couldn't pay legions. By 476 AD, deposed final emperor. Spain. Lost its empire piece by piece. Final collapse in 1898. Britain. Lost reserve currency status between 1945 and 1976. Empire dissolved. America unknown. But if the pattern holds, we're about to find out. Why they couldn't stop it. Here's the mechanism that makes this inevitable. Stopping the pattern requires cutting spending dramatically. That means cutting military, cutting welfare, cutting promises made to voters, to contractors, to foreign allies. That's political suicide. Every politician who tries it gets removed. Every leader who proposes it loses power. So they choose the slow collapse over the fast political death. They choose inflation. They choose debasement. They choose to push the crisis into the future. Rome tried reforms under Aurelian. Too late, too little. Spain tried to control silver flows, impossible, too dependent. Britain tried to maintain the pound's value, failed, too much debt. Vergessen. Every proposal for fiscal discipline gets destroyed in Congress. Every suggestion of cutting spending gets attacked. Every mention of paying down debt gets dismissed as unrealistic. The pattern doesn't require evil leaders. It doesn't require conspiracy. It just requires human nature and mathematics. And the mathematics are unforgiving. America's current position. We are currently in stage 5, inflation. The money has been printed, the prices have risen, the middle class is feeling the squeeze, and the early signs of stage 6, loss of confidence, are already visible. BRICS nations just expanded. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Iran. That's 45% of the global population, creating an explicit alternative to dollar dominance. Central banks bought more gold in 2022 and 2023 than any period since 1950. China and Russia are settling oil trades in yuan, bypassing the dollar entirely. These aren't random events, these are stage 6 indicators. Every empire in stage 5 moved to stage 6, every single one. The timeline, if the pattern holds, and it always has, America should enter full stage 6 within 2 to 5 years. Not prophecy, precedent. Let me show you why this isn't just Rome. Why this is a pattern that repeats across empires, regardless of technology, regardless of political system, regardless of how different they believed they were. Spain's warning. In 1556, a Spanish economist named Martín de Azpilcueta published a warning. He explained in explicit detail that the massive silver inflows from the Americas were causing inflation across Europe. He had the data. He understood the mechanism. He predicted the outcome. Nobody listened. Here's what happened. From 1500 to 1650, Spain imported over 16,000 metric tons of silver from mines in Potosi and Mexico. That's half of the world's silver supply flowing into Spanish coffers. Spain had infinite wealth, right? Wrong. Prices across Europe rose sixfold over 150 years. That's a 1.2% compound annual inflation rate, devastating for that era. In Spain itself, the monarchy couldn't keep up with its own costs. They borrowed from Genoese bankers. They issued bonds. They promised repayment in silver, and then they defaulted 4 times in 40 years. 1557, first bankruptcy. 1560, second bankruptcy. 1575, third bankruptcy. 1596, fourth bankruptcy. How does an empire with infinite silver go bankrupt 4 times? Because silver isn't wealth. Silver is currency, and flooding the market with currency destroys its value. The warning came in 1556. The first default came in 1557, 1 year later. They knew. They didn't care. They kept spending. They kept importing silver. They kept debasing. Jean Bodin, a French philosopher, echoed the warning in 1568. He explicitly blamed Spanish silver for Europe-wide inflation. The data was public. The mechanism was understood. The outcome was predicted. Spain did nothing. By 1640, the Spanish economy was in ruins. By 1898, the empire was gone. America's parallel to Spain. Spain had infinite silver. America has infinite printing capacity. Spain's silver influx, 16,000 tons over 150 years. America's monetary expansion, $9 trillion created since 2008. Spain's inflation, prices rose 6 times over 150 years. America's inflation. Official CPI shows 3 to 4%, but real purchasing power has collapsed 97% since 1913. Spain defaulted 4 times because debt grew faster than the economy could support. America's national debt, $33 trillion and growing. Debt to GDP, 124%. Spain's trading partners eventually refused Spanish silver. America's trading partners are creating alternatives to the dollar right now. The mechanism is identical. Create massive amounts of currency. Prices rise. Debt becomes unsustainable. Confidence collapses. Spain took 150 years from warning to collapse. America received its first serious warnings about unsustainable debt in the 1980s. We're 40 years in. Britain's warning. Britain is the most important parallel because Britain is recent, because we have the documents, because we can see exactly how reserve currency status is lost. After World War II, Britain was broke. Debt to GDP exceeded 250%. The war had been funded by borrowing and printing. The pound sterling was still the global reserve currency, but barely. In 1945, global holders of pounds, Malaysia, Kuwait, other Commonwealth nations, began asking for guarantees against devaluation. They had the data. They could see Britain's debt, they could see the spending, they could see the inevitable devaluation coming. British Treasury officials wrote memos, explicit warnings. If we don't change course, we will lose reserve status. The warnings were ignored. Why? Because changing course meant austerity, meant cutting the welfare state, meant breaking promises made during the war, political suicide. In 1949, Britain devalued the pound by 30% overnight. In 1967, another devaluation. By 1976, Britain had to be bailed out by the International Monetary Fund. The pound lost reserve currency status. The dollar replaced it. Timeline: from the first warnings in 1945 to loss of reserve status in 1976, 31 years. They had the data. They had 30 years of warnings. They had the example of every empire before them. They did nothing. America's parallel to Britain. Britain's debt to GDP after double pounds, 250%. America's debt to GDP now, 124%. Britain maintained expensive global commitments it couldn't afford. America maintains 750 bases across 80 countries. Britain's pound was challenged by a rising dollar. America's dollar is being challenged by the yuan, the euro, and BRICS alternatives. Britain received explicit warnings from foreign holders. America is receiving explicit signals, central banks diversifying, oil trades in other currencies, gold purchases accelerating. Britain's timeline from warning to loss of reserve status, 31 years. America's timeline from serious warnings 2008 financial crisis to present, 16 years. We're halfway through Britain's timeline, and the warning signs are accelerating faster. The pattern doesn't care about democracy versus monarchy. It doesn't care about technology. It doesn't care about military power. The pattern only cares about mathematics. And the mathematics say, if you debase currency, you get inflation. If you get inflation, you lose confidence. If you lose confidence, you lose everything. 3 empires prove this pattern. America is proving it again. Let's map exactly where the United States is right now on the 7-stage collapse timeline. Stage 1, dominance, 1945 to 1971. Complete Bretton Woods Agreement, 1944. The dollar became the global reserve currency, backed by gold. The United States produced over 50% of global GDP in 1945. Unchallenged military supremacy, economic dominance, currency trust was absolute. This stage ended in 1971 when Nixon closed the gold window. Stage 2, overextension. 1971 to 2001, complete post-Vietnam expansion, Cold War commitments, global military presence. By 2001, 750 bases in 80 countries. Military spending, 54% of federal discretionary spending. The empire expanded beyond its economic capacity to maintain indefinitely. Stage 3, deficit spending, 2001 to 2008. Complete wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, tax cuts, Medicare expansion. Deficits became structural, not cyclical. The national debt doubled from $5 trillion in 2001 to $10 trillion in 2008. Borrowing became permanent. Stage 4, currency debasement, 2008 to 2020, complete. The 2008 financial crisis triggered quantitative easing, QE1. $1.7 trillion. QE 2, $600 billion. QE 3, $1.7 trillion. QE 4, COVID, $4 trillion. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet exploded from $800 billion in 2008 to over $9 trillion by 2022. The dollar, already fiat since 1971, was debased on a scale never seen in American history. Stage 5, inflation, 2020 to present. So we are here, $6 trillion printed in 2020 to 2021. Inflation hit 9% in June 2022, the highest in 40 years. Despite claims of transitory inflation, prices remain elevated. Housing, food, energy, all persistently higher. Real wages have declined. Middle-class purchasing power is eroding. This is stage 5. This is where Rome was when prices started rising 50-fold. This is where Spain was during the price revolution. This is where Britain was in the 1970s. We are here right now. Stage 6. Loss of confidence. 2024 to 2028. Beginning. This is the stage we're entering. The early indicators are already visible. BRICS expansion. In 2023, BRICS added 6 new members: Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and Argentina. Later withdrew. That's 45% of global population, 36% of global GDP. They're explicitly building dollar alternatives, central bank gold purchases. In 2022 and 2023, central banks bought more gold than any period since 1950. Why? Because they're diversifying away from dollars. Oil trades in yuan. China and Russia are settling oil transactions in yuan, bypassing the dollar entirely. This is exactly what happened to Britain. Foreign holders started diversifying, slowly at first, then rapidly. Dollar reserves as a percentage of global reserves, declining from 70% in 2000 to under 60% today. If the pattern holds, and it always has, full stage 6, confidence collapse should occur within 2 to 5 years. Not a guarantee, a pattern-based projection. Stage 7, collapse, unknown timeline. Every empire that reached stage 6 eventually reached stage 7. Rome couldn't pay legions by 400 AD. Deposed final emperor in 476 AD. Spain. Lost empire gradually. Final collapse in 1898 after Spanish-American War. Britain. Lost reserve currency status 1945 to 1976. Empire dissolved shortly after. America. If we follow the pattern, stage 7 means the dollar loses reserve currency status, the empire contracts, the military withdraws, commitments are broken, timeline unknown, but the pattern suggests faster than previous empires. Rome took 200 years from stage 4 to stage 7. Britain took 30 years. America's velocity is faster than both. The exact data comparison. Let me show you the mathematical parallels one more time. Currency debasement. Rome, 98% silver. 5% silver equals 95% debasement. Spain, massive silver influx destroyed value. Britain, left gold standard, devalued repeatedly. USA, gold backing. No backing, 97% purchasing power loss since 1913. Inflation. Rome, 50 times price increase over 100 years. Spain, 6 times price increase over 150 years. Britain, 25% inflation in the 1970s. USA, 9% official peak in 2022, real inflation much higher. Debt crisis. Rome, tax revenue couldn't cover spending by 250 AD. Spain, 4 sovereign defaults in 40 years. Britain, 250% plus debt to GDP post-World War II. USA, 124% debt to GDP, $33 trillion total, loss of confidence. Rome, soldiers refused denarii, demanded gold. Spain, trading partners rejected Spanish silver. Britain, foreign holders diversified into dollars. USA, BRICS alternatives, gold purchases, yuan oil trades. The parallels aren't similar. The parallels are exact. The mathematics are identical. The pattern is absolute. We are in stage 5, entering stage 6. Every empire in stage 6 reached stage 7. No exceptions. Here's why this matters. Rome couldn't see Rome as a pattern. They were living it. They were inside it. They believed they were unique. Spain couldn't see Spain as a pattern. They had infinite silver. They thought the old rules didn't apply. Britain couldn't see Britain as a pattern. They had the world's most powerful navy, the most advanced economy. They thought they were different. They weren't different. The pattern didn't care about their military, didn't care about their technology, didn't care about their beliefs. The pattern only cared about mathematics, and the mathematics are unforgiving. But here's what makes America different. Potentially, we can see the pattern. We have Rome's data, we have Spain's data, we have Britain's data. We are the first empire in history with complete documentation of every empire that came before us. We can see ourselves as a pattern in real time. That doesn't mean we'll change course. Politically, that's still impossible. But individually, you can prepare. You can understand which assets survived previous collapses. In Rome, those who held denarii were wiped out. Those who held land, gold, and real goods survived. In Spain, those who held debased silver lost everything. Those who diversified into property and foreign assets survived. In Britain, those who held pounds watched their wealth evaporate. Those who moved into dollars and real assets survived. The pattern rewards the prepared and punishes the faithful. This isn't financial advice. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm showing you historical precedents. Those who recognize the pattern early position themselves accordingly. Those who believe this time is different learned the same lesson every empire before them learned. The pattern is absolute. What you can do: understand the stages, recognize where we are, watch for stage 6 indicators, accelerating de-dollarization, more nations joining BRICS, gold prices surging, dollar reserve percentages declining. When stage 6 becomes obvious, it will be too late to prepare. That's the lesson from Britain. The warnings come early, the collapse comes fast. Pattern recognition isn't pessimism. It's survival intelligence. 3 empires saw it coming. Rome had Cassius Dio warning them in 200 AD. They did nothing. Spain had Martín de Azpilcueta warning them in 1556. They did nothing. Britain had treasury memos warning them in 1945. They did nothing. None of them stopped it, because stopping it required political choices no empire has ever been willing to make. America has the same warnings right now. Congressional Budget Office projections showing unsustainable debt, Federal Reserve data showing unprecedented monetary expansion, global economic signals showing confidence erosion. We have the data, we have the pattern, we have their examples, and we're doing nothing, because doing something requires sacrifice no politician will propose and no voter will accept. So the pattern continues, the mathematics continue, the stages continue. You now see what they saw, you now know what they knew. The question is, will you see it before stage 6 or realize it after? Let me know in the comments. Which empire's warnings do you think were clearest? Rome, Spain, or Britain? And do you think America will be different? If you want to see what comes next, if you want to understand how the derivatives market will accelerate stage 6, how the commercial real estate crisis will trigger the cascade, how the pattern plays out from here, subscribe, because next week we're covering the $600 trillion derivatives bomb, the financial weapon of mass destruction that will make 2008 look like practice. The pattern is clear, the mathematics are undeniable. The only question is timing, and if history is any guide, we don't have long. The pattern doesn't care if you believe it, the pattern only cares about mathematics, and the mathematics are already in motion.